Hello everyone, I am the Whisperer. We are on the subreddit No Sleep. So if you enjoy this video, make sure like and subscribe and make sure to comment your favorite story in the comments. And without further ado, let's get into the video. I found home videos of my family that shouldn't exist. My brother died when I was 7 years old. He was 13. He drowned in the lake down the street from our house. My parents never touched his room. They tried once, but they couldn't do it. Too raw. After that, the door just stayed shut. His room became a kind of museum of him. That was 11 years ago. His room still looks the same. This morning, while I was packing for college, I thought I'd finally go in there. My plan wasn't anything dramatic. I just wanted to grab a few hoodies, maybe a keepsake or two to take with me. Something to hold on to when I got homesick. Full transparency, I've been in his room plenty of times before. I've sat on his bed, I've looked through his shelves, but I've never really gone digging. That felt wrong, and I really had no inclination to. I just missed my brother. That wasn't my intention today either. It wasn't my intention to find a stack of DVDs shoved into the bottom drawer of his dresser. There were 3 of them, just labeled 1, 2, and 3. The only DVD player in the house is still hooked up to his old TV. Everything else went streaming years ago. For a minute, I told myself not to do it. They weren't mine. They probably didn't matter. I picked up some of the items I had collected, put the DVDs back in his drawer, and returned to my room. Tonight, they started calling to me. I know how that sounds. I know you're thinking it was just my curiosity eating at me. But it wasn't like that. It felt physical, a pull in my chest. So I crept back across the hall, slipped into his room, locked the door behind me so my parents wouldn't hear, and I put in the first DVD. It was a home video. I didn't even know we had any. I don't remember my parents ever owning a camera. The video starts with static, then clears just enough to show something. The picture is muddy, warped. It could be the living room, but the furniture looks wrong. Everything is too big or too small, shifting every time the frame jitters. Sometimes it almost looks like a bedroom, sometimes like a hallway. No faces, no clear shapes, just flickering shadows that don't match what the voices are saying. Because there are voices, familiar ones. Laughter, clinking dishes, and my mom calling my brother's name. It sounds like family in the background, just out of sight. I hear my brother's laughter, and the sound swallows me whole. Then beneath it is another voice. Low, deliberate, close enough that you couldn't miss it. You haven't noticed yet. Then the video cut off, just like that. I scrambled to replay it, not even thinking about the other 2 discs still stacked under the TV. I just wanted to hear him laugh again. That laugh. I tried not to think about the end, though the fear of it was crawling slowly up my spine as I hit play. Because the way it spoke, it sounded like it wasn't part of the recording at all. Like it was speaking to the camera. To me. I pressed play again, pausing every few seconds, desperate to make sense of what I was seeing. But nothing held still. Everything looked almost familiar, like a room you swear you've been in but can't place. The walls were too narrow, the colors too washed out. It made my brain feel like it was short-circuiting. Then I froze the frame just before the moment he laughed. And there it was. A caption, faint and yellow, burned into the corner of the screen. July 30th, 2015. 7 months after my brother drowned. My first thought was that it was a glitch. It had to be. The camera must have been off by a year. There's no other explanation. I forced myself to breathe and to shove back the rising panic. Then I pressed play again. His laugh filled the room, and for a second, my fear washed away. It was just him again. Alive, warm, present. A bittersweet rush of comfort and grief. But then the voice returned, closer this time. Wet against the microphone, broken and cutting in and out like static. You noticed. I ripped the DVD out of the player and threw it across the room. I don't even know why I did it. Adrenaline, I guess. My hands were shaking so hard I couldn't control myself. I'm trying to think of logical explanations. I want to believe there's one. But every reason I come up with feels paper thin. I bolted back to my room and dove under the covers. Like that would help. I don't want to watch the other videos. I don't, but I can feel them pulling at me, like they're not finished, like I owe them something. I can't sleep. It's dark. It's late. The rain just started. The bathroom faucet always drips, but tonight it sounds so much louder. You could almost confuse it for footsteps. I'm a trucker on a highway that doesn't exist. There are rules for surviving the road. Don't be alarmed if the road feels a few minutes longer every time you drive it. That's because it is. As the road lengthens, new side streets may appear. Do not take these, however alluring. Gas stations may pop up to fill in stretches of empty desert. Be wary of purchasing snack brands from them you have never heard of or that do not exist. Cacti will show up every few miles that weren't there on your last drive. These are just cacti. No need to fear the cacti. If your drive on Route 333 takes more than 30 minutes than the last time, report such fluctuations immediately. Multiple former employees who failed to report such anomalies are still stuck there. Still driving. Employee Handbook, Section 7. C. It was about the time I graduated from undergrad and finally braved checking on the empty void that was my bank account that I realized 3 things. Perhaps an English degree hadn't been the smartest choice for replenishing the aforementioned empty void that was my bank account. I could no longer live in student housing. I had utterly no idea what to do with my life. All of those, along with a healthy mix of typical Gen Z stress, depression, insert anxiety disorder here, were probably the reasons I responded to the advert in my mailbox for trucking positions along the Pacific coast. I didn't actually expect anything to come of my application, but the company responded immediately and offered to pay for a trip to go out and talk with them. I'd never been to California, so why not? Besides your typical interview questions, the only other thing they had me do was a skill assessment. All you have to do is take a freight truck to the turnaround point and come back. The interviewing manager, Randall, dangled a set of keys in front of me. He seemed like a nice enough guy, if a bit guarded. Not too difficult. You look like a competent boy. Don't I need a commercial driver's license? I'd actually driven the campus shuttle for 2 years during college, but it hadn't been a large enough bus to need a commercial license. I'd made that clear on my application. Do you think you're able to drive a rig of this size? Well, yeah, but then don't worry about it, Randall told me. How far is the turnaround? For most, it's 4 hours, but it could be less. That's what we're testing you on. So you want me to speed in a 5-ton vehicle that I don't have a license for? More like 15 tons, and absolutely not. Don't speed. That would taint the results. We want to time how long it takes you naturally. The logic made no sense. Don't speed, but cross your fingers it goes quick? But it didn't matter anymore. The whole situation was sketchy. This was multiple levels of illegal, and federal prison wasn't what I imagined the keynote speaker meant by seize every opportunity in her graduation speech. I was steeling myself to tell all this to Randall and walk straight out of the office when, I forgot to mention, he said, $800 in compensation for your time. 10 minutes later, I was in the cab, turning the key. I noticed another man, similar age to me, sitting in the idling cab of another semi just across the parking lot. Another applicant, Randall explained. It's easier for us if we time multiple of you at the same time. The other man gave me a friendly wave, then just as pleasantly flipped me off, which was such a confusing series of events, I decided to log it away for later to process fully. Dead meat, he mouthed, though it could have just as easily been red beets. What's the address of the turnaround? I asked, waving my phone to show the open Google Maps app. No phones, Randall said. Instead, he explained how I would recognize the turnaround point, a red-roofed, unmanned weighing station some way down Route 333, along with a few other basic guidelines. 1. Don't use your phone for any reason, not even for music. Leave it on airplane mode, or better, just power it off. Even if there's an emergency, use the handheld radio. 2. Do feel free to listen to the stereo, though. Station 86, 9FM is country, if that's your thing, but probably steer clear of Station 96. Under 5.3, no picking up hitchhikers. Not even if they look like they're hurt. Not even if they're begging and crying for a ride, especially if they're begging and crying. Really, don't. 4, around halfway there, your rig will stall and come to a stop. Don't panic. Don't turn it off. Don't get out. Put it in park and wait exactly 1 minute and 47 seconds. After that, the engine should start back up. If for some reason the rig doesn't start after that time, well, it should. But if it doesn't, I asked. Hide, he said. Close your eyes until it does, but it should. Okay then. These are all spelled out with more details in the employee handbook. He told me when I understandably, tried asking more questions. You shouldn't have to worry about most of them unless you get the job. Just don't use your phone, and most importantly, don't freak out when the rig stalls out. But how do you already know it's going? He raised his hands and shook his head to signal no more questions. $800, I reminded myself. There's something slightly soul-sucking in the realization of how low a price you can be bought for. Then again, there's something soul-sucking in being a broke, unemployed college grad, so pick your poison. One last thing, Randall tells me from underneath the window. Whatever you see, whatever happens, don't ever stop driving. Not at all ominous. He winked. I watched as the other interviewee pulled away first. My competitor, I decided now that I really did have a second to process his introduction. Twat. After I'd adjusted my mirrors and seat, I pulled out after him, highly aware of the timer in Randall's hand as he shrunk to a pinprick in my rear view. The most nerve-wracking part of the whole experience? No GPS. I wasn't worried about getting lost. The instructions were basically to drive straight on Route 333 until I arrived. But there was something disconcerting about knowing if I did get lost, I wasn't allowed to look up my location. I don't think I'd ever actually driven anywhere new without my phone. I already know what you boomers out there will say. My generation is soft. We never learned to do things the hard way. We're addicted to technology. To which I'll respond, true. Fair, really. But also you try giving up your iPhone. The first minutes of the drive went smooth. The highway was a bit twisty, but otherwise calm with a gorgeous view. Gargantuan trees, some variant of redwood I assumed, towered over me from every side. But pretty as it was, the two-lane road was practically deserted. No other cars passed me. None snuck up behind me. I flipped on my headlights to deal with the shade. It was a bit eerie, truthfully. After a while, I started catching glimpses of the competitor man's truck through the trees. I'd pass a bend, and his rig would flash between branches and trunks. He'd disappear around turns, but I was catching up. How to get around him? The road was thin, and if this was some sort of a speed race, there was no way he'd pull over to let me get by. Maybe another lane would open up soon. Maybe if I honked, it would spook him enough to let me pass? Turns out, it didn't matter. Just as I was solidly behind him, my truck went silent. There was no sputter of life eking from a motor, nor the dying cough of an engine. The gas pedal simply stopped working. My rig slowed some more, then stopped. I was prepared for this. I waited. In my head, I counted. Randall had known. Somehow he'd known my rig would sputter out at some point, but he hadn't seemed concerned. Was it planned? Some way to see how we reacted in stressful situations? I found myself wildly looking around for a security camera. Don't be paranoid. Just like he'd told me, somewhere around second number 100, the engine roared back to life. My freight truck chugged forward, and when I applied gas, it sped up. All right then. The rest of the drive was blessedly uneventful. I never caught back up to competitor man, but smooth otherwise. At some point, the trees petered out to a short stretch of desert highway, and then the red-roofed weighing station. I slowed down and looked at the time. This couldn't be right. I'd only been driving for half an hour or so, and the other truck had never passed me. Randall had said it usually took several hours to get here. This couldn't be the correct place? It was, though. It had to be. I was still on the Route 333. I was sure of it. This was the first weighing station, and the description matched perfectly. I pulled out the digital camera Randall had given me and snapped a picture. If I was wrong, at least I could claim stupidity, not that I'd been trying to cheat. Maybe that would be enough. I maneuvered the rig through the unmanned station and headed back the way I'd come. Eventually, I reached the redwoods. The world transformed from sunlight back to shadow and mist. Tendrils of fog wafted above exposed roots. I'd be back in just a few minutes now. Then the truck started to slow. I swore, not again. Sure enough, though, the rig came to a stop in a section of the forest so shaded it could have been evening. Bugs sped in and out of the headlight beams. Something was off. Nerves, I told myself. This whole thing is strange, so you're overthinking. That was usually the problem. Overthinking, spiraling until I shut down. It was the reason I majored in a subject that let me be quiet and clack away on my laptop. It was the reason I got a job on the campus shuttle, where I wouldn't have to talk to anybody, and applied for this position in the first place. It had been building for months, years maybe, this feeling that something in my life was wrong. Off. But after I'd gone through and eliminated the only things it could be, all I was left with was me. The thing that was broken was me. And maybe that wasn't something I could realistically run away from, but I could sure try. For the first time in months, while driving Route 333, I'd felt normal in the thrill of the leaving something behind, but now I was stopped, stagnant, and it was all back again. And then another realization. How long has it been? I hadn't counted this time. There hadn't been a need after last time, but it felt like at least a few minutes had passed? Maybe? I started counting in my head. 20, 45, 60. I gave up. It had definitely been longer than a minute 47. The truck still wasn't moving. The first cold edges of true fear crept into me, up my spine and snaking around my heart. I waited some more. I swore some more. When neither of those delightfully brilliant options worked, I put the truck in park, cracked the door, and hopped down. Outside was chillier than I'd imagined. Weird. Sure, it was shady, but it was still summer. I considered trying to pop the hood of this thing. For some reason, all men, even those of us with no mechanical knowledge, feel a sense of control by ponderously examining broken engines. But for a massive beast like this, I couldn't pretend to know where to start. "Hello?" I called. In the mist, off in the distance, there almost looked like a figure. Fog rolled through and they vanished. Did they live around here? Maybe I could ask them for help. When the mist cleared, there was nobody. Hide. That's what Randall had told me, albeit offhandedly. Hide and close your eyes. But that just felt silly. Some way for him to distract me from realizing he'd stuck me with a crappy vehicle. Either way, I needed to go back in for my phone. Forget the rules. I was calling for help. The handle was locked. I rounded to the other side and tried that handle too. Locked. Incessant swearing might not have solved my problems the first 2 times, but no reason not to try in a third, right? The coldness clutched my heart until I could barely breathe. I watched as more mist rolled into the trees, and the figure, it was back, closer. For a second time, I almost called out for help. Hide. Before I could overthink my overthinking, before I could question how stupid I'd look, I dropped to my stomach and rolled under the truck. Then I squeezed my eyes shut. A set of footsteps approached the vehicle. I started to look up, but stopped myself and pressed my face to the asphalt where I wouldn't be tempted. Another set joined it, then another. They started moving faster, in no particular pattern around the rig. A dozen pittering dogs' feet, except heavier, more intentional, frantic. Something tried at the door handles. I could hear the frustrated yank over and over. They were searching the area, looking for a way in. Don't look. Don't look. Don't. Above me, the engine roared to life. All at once, the 100 desperate footsteps stopped completely. I wasted no time. I rolled from my hiding spot, scrambled across the deserted road for the now unlocked door, and threw the rig into drive. Within seconds, I was hurtling back down the highway towards safety. That's it, I thought. I passed my twisted test, and now I get to return safely and refuse this sick job once and for all. And that was all true. I was safe. I would get to scream at Randall. Just not before seeing what was behind the next turn. It came from nowhere. I swerved like crazy to avoid it. By the time I even processed what was obstructing the road, I'd already passed it with no chance of slowing back down. It had been my competitor's truck, totally stopped, diagonal across the whole road, and the man who'd been driving it, he'd been splayed across the hood, skewered through by a tree branch the length of a door. His eyes had been torn out. What was that? Now let's not get too excited. Randall looked up from his desk, back at the truck yard. What were those things? Who did that to the other guy? Other guy. He was stabbed by a tree. His eyes were literally empty sockets. Randall sighed. Not the sigh of, oh no, there's a crazy man yelling at me. The sigh of, oh great, more paperwork. Unit 50, he spoke into his handheld radio. There's a cleanup. I found out my husband is a serial killer. If you've ever loved someone, really loved them, you'll understand why I didn't see it sooner. Love isn't blind, it's selective. It chooses what to look at, and I didn't want to see the cracks. I met Aaron in my last year of college. He wasn't my type at first, too tall, too quiet, too still. But he had this way of listening to me that made me feel like I was the only person in the room. We got married 3 years later. For the first 5 years, we were the cliché perfect couple. Vacations, dinner parties, inside jokes. He never raised his voice, never lost his temper. If I had to describe him in one word, it would have been safe. But then little things started to bother me. It began with the basement. Aaron didn't let me down there. Not in a don't touch my tools way, more in a the door's always locked way. He said it was because the steps were steep and I was clumsy, and I believed him for a while. Then there was the laundry. Once a week he'd wash his clothes alone, not with mine, not even in the same load as his other clothes. Just one set, jeans, a long-sleeved shirt, and an old hoodie. Always dark colors, always late at night. I'd wake up at 2 a.m. to the sound of the dryer, but he'd never let me help fold them. Said it was just work clothes. The first real crack appeared one night in January. Aaron was late coming home. Really late. I stayed up waiting, pacing the living room, imagining car accidents or ER visits. When he finally came in at almost 3 a.m., his hands were shaking. His hoodie was damp, and there was a smear of something dark on his cuff. Paint, he told me, but I knew he was lying. 2 weeks later, the news broke. A young woman had been found in a drainage ditch on the edge of town, beaten, strangled. The police didn't have a suspect. The photo they showed on TV was haunting, not because I knew her, but because I recognized the ditch. It was less than a mile from where Aaron worked. I tried to ignore the thought. I really did, but the coincidences kept piling up. He'd come home late. The news would have another report of a missing woman, and every single one had last been seen near the industrial park where Aaron's office was. I started noticing his work clothes more. The way they smelled, metallic, like pennies and bleach. The way he kept them separate. The way he never threw them out, no matter how worn they got. The night it all clicked, I wasn't even looking for proof. I was looking for wrapping paper in the closet when I found the shoebox. It was tucked behind old coats, wrapped in a garbage bag. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, all women. Some smiling in daylight, some taken at night, their faces lit by a camera flash. Some were asleep, some were clearly dead. I dropped the box. It was like my body refused to hold it. When Aaron came home, I tried to act normal. I couldn't. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. He noticed. Of course he noticed. "What's wrong?" he asked. I opened my mouth to lie, but then I saw it. A single hair stuck to his sleeve, long, blonde. I'm brunette. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't move. I just lay there, listening to him breathe next to me, wondering how many women had fallen asleep beside him and never woken up. The next morning, I called the police from my car. I told them everything. The clothes, the shoebox, the smell. They told me to leave the house and wait. That was 2 weeks ago. They arrested him quietly in our driveway. I watched from a neighbor's window as they pulled him out in handcuffs. He didn't fight. He didn't even look surprised. They found 6 bodies. They think there are more. I'm giving this statement now because I don't know how else to get it out of me. Because I keep replaying every dinner, every kiss, every night curled up against him, and wondering how many times I almost became number 7. If you're reading this, and you think you know the person you're with, check again. Some monsters don't growl. They smile and ask about your day, and hold your hand while they wash the blood out of their clothes. I followed carnival music into the woods. I shouldn't have. I live in a tiny rural town where nothing exciting ever happens. I'm a teenage girl and somewhat of a loner. I have no real friends. I don't get invited to parties. Nothing exciting ever happens to me. One day, on my way home from school, I was walking past the local park and noticed a new sign nailed to a post. Carnival coming, Friday, October 13th. I couldn't believe it. A carnival? Here, in my boring little town? I counted down the days, dreaming about the bright lights, the rides, the sounds of laughter. Something to break the silence. But when the day came, the park was empty. No carnival, no music, no people. Just the usual dead grass and rusted swings. I felt like the world had played a cruel joke on me. Later that evening, I took my dog Max for a walk to clear my head. That's when I heard it, a faint melody drifting through the air. Carnival music. The kind of eerie, old-fashioned tune you hear in movies. It was coming from the woods behind the park. Max's fur bristled, and he whimpered nervously, trying to pull me away. But I couldn't stop. Something pulled me forward, a strange force I didn't understand. Max tore away from his lead and bolted towards home, but I ignored him and continued towards the music. The woods opened into a clearing. And there it was, a carnival. But it wasn't anything like I'd imagined. The tents were faded and torn. The lights flickered dimly. The air smelled like stale popcorn mixed with something metallic and sharp. People wandered the grounds, but no one I recognized. Their eyes were glassy and empty, their smiles fixed and unnatural. A small man in a jester's costume appeared out of nowhere and stood beside me. His face was painted white, but his grin stretched too far, too wide. It seemed etched into his skin. "Welcome, welcome," he whispered, voice soft but chilling. "Come see your fate." He led me into a tiny tent. Outside, it looked cramped, no bigger than a doghouse. Inside, it stretched endlessly into darkness, lit only by a few dim candles casting an eerie glow. The air was cold and heavy. The jester motioned to a chair, the size of a child's toy. It was ridiculously small, too small. But when I sat down, to my surprise, I fit perfectly, as if it had been made just for me. He shuffled a deck of worn cards and laid 3 face down on a small table. "Turn them," he said, voice low and mocking. The first card showed the back of a girl inside a tent, staring at a sinister little man, the jester himself. My blood ran cold. The girl in the picture was dressed exactly like me, with the same hair color and style. She looked like me. The second card was the same image, except a large figure lurked behind the jester. Huge, with glowing red eyes and something sharp in its hand. I didn't want to turn over the third card, but when I looked up to the jester, a strange feeling came over me. I looked down again, and to my shock, the third card was already flipped. I didn't remember turning it over. It showed a gruesome scene. The girl lay lifeless on the ground, a massive wound in her chest, a pool of blood surrounding her. I looked closer at her face. It was mine. Panic hit me. I tried to stand, but the chair gripped me, claws digging into my skin. I struggled, twisting and pulling, but I was stuck. The jester's grin widened as he leaned in close. No escape. A large figure stepped out from the shadows, the same one from the cards. The candlelight glinted off the machete in its hand. With a sudden surge, I yanked free and stumbled to my feet. The tent walls seemed to close in, shadows reaching for me. The machete swung, slicing the air inches from my face. The candles blew out. Darkness swallowed everything. I ran, blind, crashing into the tent wall. I felt along the fabric, but there was no seam, no gap. The tent seemed fused to the earth. I slid to the ground, sobbing until I heard footsteps. Heavy, getting closer. Little bells jingled. I jumped up and ran again. My strength drained, but then I saw a faint flicker of light ahead. Footsteps closed in behind me. Something swung past my head. I dove toward the light and tumbled through a gap in the tent wall, face first into the dirt. I was outside. I didn't stop running until I was home, until I was safe. I told my parents what happened. They looked worried and agreed to come back with me. But when we returned to the clearing in the woods, it was empty. No carnival, no tents, no music, just the wind whispering through the trees. At night, the music plays again, softer now, right outside my bedroom window. Max won't stop growling at the corner of my room where the shadows gather. And sometimes when I'm falling asleep, I swear I hear bells jingle. Then a tiny voice, barely a whisper, right next to my ear. Next time, you won't run. If you ever see a sign for a carnival that never comes, don't follow the music. Some shows aren't meant to be attended, and some doors, once opened, never truly close. My family doesn't have a graveyard. We have a pantry. My family doesn't age like other people. My grandmother was 98 when she passed, but she looked 65, maybe younger. My great-uncle is 102 and still chops his own firewood. We've always credited it to good genes and our one sacred tradition, the renewal stew, served at every major family gathering. It was a rich, dark, savory stew that made you feel warm from the inside out, full of life. When Grandma Rose died, I was the one who inherited the old family farmhouse. Tucked away in her study, I finally found it, the original, handwritten recipe book, bound in cracked leather. I felt a thrill, like I was finally being let in on the secret. I opened it to the page for the renewal stew. It was mostly blank. There were no ingredients listed for the stew itself, only 2 cryptic notes in my great-great-grandmother's spidery script. For the broth, see the cellar instructions. For the seasoning, see the attic instructions. The cellar was damp and smelled of earth. Behind a stack of old canning jars, I found a loose stone in the wall. Pulling it free revealed a dark, hidden chamber. Inside, arranged in neat rows, were a dozen large, unglazed clay pots filled with a dark, peaty soil. A thick, pale, gnarled root snaked out of the soil in each pot, looking disturbingly like a human hand. A dusty journal sat on a small table. The entries, dating back to the 1800s, describe the process. When a member of our family dies, they aren't buried or cremated. They are planted. Their bodies are prepared with a special mixture of herbs and laid to rest in these pots. Over the years, the soil and the body produce a life root. This root is harvested, boiled for 3 days, and becomes the broth for the renewal stew. I felt a wave of nausea. We weren't just eating stew. We were consuming the concentrated essence of our dead ancestors. Shaking, I went to the attic. In a locked trunk, I found a collection of small, ornate silver boxes, each engraved with the name of a living family member. I found my own, my name freshly engraved. Inside each box was a small, sharp obsidian knife. Another journal explained the final step, the seasoning. It wasn't a spice. At each gathering, every family member present must make a living contribution to the stew. A few drops of blood, a sliver of fingernail. A tear cried directly into the pot. This offering of the living is what awakens the ancestral broth. I slammed the book shut, my hands trembling. It was a grotesque, cannibalistic ritual. I vowed I would never participate. The next major gathering was for the autumn equinox. I made an excuse not to go, claiming I had the flu. I felt a sense of righteous defiance. A week later, my mother called, her voice thin and weak. "Your Aunt Carol isn't doing well," she said. "She's had a sudden decline." I drove to my aunt's house. The woman who opened the door was a stranger. She looked 80 years old, her skin thin and translucent like parchment, her hair patchy and white. But it was Aunt Carol. She was only 58. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a desperate, hungry light. "You didn't come?" she rasped, her hand gripping my arm with surprising strength. Her fingernails were cracked and yellow. "The stew, it wasn't strong enough. It's always weaker when someone is missing." I finally understood. We don't have good genes. We have a curse, a rapid, horrifying decay that is constantly trying to claim us. The stew isn't a fountain of youth. It's the only thing that holds the rot at bay. We aren't living long lives. We are desperately, grotesquely staving off an accelerated death. The winter solstice is next month. My mother called again yesterday. She told me my great-uncle's hands are so stiff he can no longer hold an axe. She told me she found a new gray hair, and when she plucked it, a small patch of skin came with it. Then she asked if I would be coming home for the solstice. Her voice was casual, but the question hung in the air, heavy and raw. They need me. They need my contribution. I'm looking at the small silver box with my name on it. The little black knife sits inside, cold and sharp. I have a choice. I can go, participate in this stomach-churning ritual, and feed the curse to keep my family looking young and vibrant while I know the horrifying truth. Or I can stay here, clean and pure, and watch them all fall apart, knowing that the same rot is flowing through my own veins, waiting for its turn. I'm a ride operator for a theme park. There's one roller coaster we are not allowed to operate. I've always been obsessed with roller coasters. There's just something about the way they defy gravity, defy death, rush you to the very brink, teetering at the edge where anything can go wrong, yet somehow everyone returns safe and sound at the end. At least most of the time, right? There are some roller coasters that have been famously dangerous, like the Jetline in Sweden, a popular coaster that ran for decades. But after replacement parts weren't properly tested, one of the coaster's trains derailed, fatally. Or at Six Flags, where a restraint on the Texas Giant coaster came undone and a woman was flung from the ride to her death. In my town, there's a small Six Flags-style theme park. I won't tell you the name, but you've probably heard of it in the news recently. In any case, it's mostly rides and carnival games. I've been an operator there for the past few months, but there's one roller coaster that no passengers are allowed to ride. It's funny because I see them test running it all the time. One day, I even went and asked a fellow staff member, Markesha, when they were going to open the new coaster. She said never, and I couldn't tell if she was serious or joking. I asked her again. She said with a shrug, "Boss says the Ultimate has got some sort of bug." Anyway, fast forward a couple months and Markesha and I are kind of casually dating. She's nerdy, snarky, and a few years older than I am. We're pretty different, but maybe that's why we get along. One thing that unites us is our passion for roller coasters. The Ultimate still isn't open, and one afternoon she suggests that maybe we ride it ourselves after the park closes. Wait, for real? I exclaimed. Yeah, I mean, last time everything got safety checked, it passed all the checks. Plus, I saw someone on it yesterday when it was running. There's literally nothing wrong with it. I think it's just superstition the boss won't open it to the public. He's convinced it'll go wrong, like the first time, he says. The idea of there being some flaw in the Ultimate's design that could be dangerous gave me pause. But Markesha was at least as well-versed as I was in all the ways theme park rides can kill you. Anytime there was news of another theme park death, we'd talk about whether it fit into our top 10. Mechanical failures, obviously, are big on our list. And design failures, like the water slide that decapitated a 10-year-old boy. Then there are human errors. We often argue whether to count fatalities from visitors trespassing in fenced-off areas and then getting whacked by mechanical parts. I don't really count these since, well, it's kind of like when people play on train tracks. Not to be mean about it, but in those situations, you can't really blame the rides. Anyway, the Ultimate didn't have any mechanical issues or design flaws, so in theory, it should be safe. Like Markesh had said, it had recently been tested for any engineering problems and passed with flying colors. It ran smoother than our flagship roller coaster, the Cobra. Neither Markesha nor I had pre-existing health issues. And the design of the Ultimate was nothing extraordinary. It had only one giant loop, and further on, a smaller one. Despite the name, it was actually less intense than the Cobra, our most popular coaster. Probably the coolest thing about it was its design, a jet black roller coaster with sinuous curves like a serpent. So anyway, Markesha and a friend of hers, Carlos, and I all agreed to meet after the park closed and try out the Ultimate. Staff were still cleaning up around the park, but it was deserted of visitors when I went to meet Carlos at the main entrance. I remember Carlos and I walking toward those ominous black loops of the Ultimate and seeing the coaster running as Markesha put it through one more test run. Either another employee or a test dummy was in it as it shot by. It was very fast. Not fastest in the world, but damned if it wasn't fastest in the park. Dude, that thing is awesome, exclaimed Carlos. When we got to the ride's entrance, Markesha told me everything checked out fine and that she and Carlos would go first. I started to object, but she said, "Nah, I get first dibs. I'll run it for you again after." "Woohoo, let's do this," said Carlos. Like all modern roller coasters, pretty much everything was automated after pushing the button for it to go. The main part of my job was the safety checks beforehand, making sure everyone was strapped in, nothing loose, no belongings to go flying off and hurt someone, etc. I sighed and performed the requisite safety checks on Markesha and Carlos, tugging their harnesses to make sure they were strapped in. The rest of the train was, of course, empty. Come on, let's go!" hooted Markesha. "Let's do this!" shouted Carlos. I pressed the button and sent them on their way. The coaster began, its two passengers shouting and waving, and slowly ascended the incline to the park's most precipitous drop. I watched, trying not to feel envy. Oh, I'd get my turn, but I burned with the desire to go first. I watched as that sleek black train climbed to the very top, hung for a moment at the peak, and dropped like a bullet. Screams from my two friends as they plunged, their hands up, waving, laughter on their faces as they flashed by. And then they were looping. I lost sight of them for a moment from the operator area, so I came out from under the roof and looked up. They were heading toward the second loop. But oddly, there was another passenger, somewhere at the back of the train car. But I could have sworn it was empty when they boarded the ride. As they spiraled into the second loop, I waited for renewed screams and laughter. But the roller coaster looped silently, winding on this hypnotic track, and then taking the big slow circle around back to the start. Not a sound from it. The click-clack of the train's arrival, and then the hiss of brakes. At the front, I could see Markesha and Carlos slumped in their seats. No one else in the train with them, and no movement from either of them. I did not immediately go to unbuckle them. I was too much in shock, because why weren't they moving? Were they both unconscious? Had they hit their heads, been jostled too hard? But the ride looked so smooth. Suddenly, another infamous roller coaster came to mind, one that had been designed but never constructed. Markesha and I used to debate about whether it would be fantastic or terrifying to ride the euthanasia coaster. The idea is that 24 riders board and pass through 7 loops, and when the ride comes to a stop, they are all dead. The roller coaster's loops become tighter and tighter, the G-forces inducing prolonged cerebral hypoxia, insufficient oxygen to the brain. If you were a rider on it, you'd pass out and be dead before coming to the ride's end. To me, the concept is horrible. Markesha always said it would be a terrific way to die. I still didn't have the courage to approach her or Carlos. There was another staff member walking by outside the ride, pushing a drinks cart. I screamed for help. She came up and went to the roller coaster and swore and then got on the phone. Emergency services arrived and unstrapped Markesha and Carlos. The next day, the park opened as normal. The incident didn't even make the news until much later, since there were no traumatized crowds or blood or cleanup. Just the 2 bodies unstrapped and quietly carried away, and a roller coaster that remained out of commission, as it had always been. I'm haunted by the fact mine was the hand that pushed the button. But the ultimate was examined, and all test runs with dummies proved safe. There's no explanation. The ride remains closed due to the bug that Markesha mentioned to me back before she decided we should try to ride it. The bug has become kind of an urban myth among the staff there. They test the coaster again every once in a while, running it without anybody on it. They never put anybody on it. But I learned later that the bug isn't a design flaw, per se. What the boss calls the bug is actually a passenger. A rider that can always be seen in one of the seats near the back, even when the coaster runs with no one in it. A passenger who always appears after the first loop. At least it used to be a single passenger. Now there are 3. I was paid 50 calories to dine with a stranger. I was broke as shit, flatlined financially, emotionally, existentially. Whether by poor choices in my youth or plain old shit luck, life spat me out straight from high school and onto the streets. Drugs followed, rehab, then relapse. I drifted from couches to shelters to squatting in abandoned homes. Steady income? Never heard of it. So when I saw the email, I almost deleted it without reading. I figured it was just another rejection for one of my poorly written job applications until the header caught my attention. Dinner with me for $50,000. I'm not exactly attractive. Even before addiction wrecked the few good features I had, I didn't have much going for me. My eyes had sunk into my skull like they wanted to disappear. My skin had forgotten what hydration felt like. So this email? Ridiculous. I had no looks, no resume, no justification for being chosen. But I just left a shelter, and 50 grand was a dream bigger than anything I'd ever held. So I read on. It was from a domain I'd never seen before, shepardk@snkcompunctionfirm.com. The message read, "Dear recipient, I trust this message finds you well. I invite you to join me for dinner at Ch-Ch-Ch-4. This is not a romantic offer. You will be compensated handsomely for your time, provided you adhere to the following terms. Remain for the full meal until I pay the bill and escort you out. Do not pay for anything yourself. Wear formal attire. If you don't own a suit, one will be provided at the entrance. It will fit. Any breach will void all compensation. To accept, reply. A time and date will be sent. To decline, disregard this message." Did it seem insane? Absolutely. But desperation makes fools of us all. The kind of fool that doesn't ask for explanation, just a fork in a seat. So I replied, "Hello, Shepard. Thank you for your generous offer. I accept your terms and will be there. May I ask a few questions about this proposition? Again, thank you." I didn't expect a response. Maybe a phishing scam. Maybe nothing. But seconds later, a reply came. Monday at 6 p.m. Questions may be asked at dinner. Thank you for your cooperation. More cryptic bullshit. That's when I gained the smallest amount of common sense and decided to look into whoever this guy was. This was clearly his business email, so I Googled the domain, S&K Compunction Firm. I was expecting some big group of lawyers off the name alone. But nope, no law firm, just a single office tucked in a strip mall. No products, no services, just a photo of the branch manager, despite the fact that the office barely looked big enough for 2 people, and the title implied multiple locations, yet I couldn't even find a second one. What did they do? Solutions. No specifics. Just that one word. I thought about backing out. Probably should have. But when you've got nothing left, hesitance starts looking like a luxury. I had nothing to lose. So I took the chance. Between drug-fueled stupors and getting my ass kicked once or twice, Monday crept up on me like bruises do. Slow, unseen, then sudden. I didn't have anything formal, so I threw on the only white button-up shirt I owned and some gray slacks. Both had stains I couldn't explain, and no iron had graced their surface in years. Still, they were the fanciest clothes I had. None of it mattered. The second I hobbled into the restaurant, the greeter, if you could even call them that, handed me a dry-cleaned suit without a word and pointed to the bathrooms. I took the hint. This suit seemed expensive. Real Men's Warehouse type shit. It fit perfectly, just like the email said. Too perfectly, actually. The cuffs landed exactly at my wrist bone. The collar rested like it knew my neck's shape already. I didn't have the time or money to question it. I walked back out. The place had a strange charm. Soft lighting spilled across tablecloths in smooth pools of warmth. Ornate picture frames lined the walls, filled with abstract paintings that felt a bit too familiar. Wood trim hugged every surface. Big, glittery curtains hung heavy like a wedding reception. It smelled like artificial plants and faded fabric. Soft jazz floated through the air and brushed against my ears. As I scanned the room, I realized something unsettling. When I first walked in, there were at least 4 tables of people laughing and enjoying themselves. It had been noisy and lively, but now, silent. Empty. Like a bell had rung that only I hadn't heard. Just a few bartenders, the mute greeter, and one bald man in a suit eerily similar to mine. I already knew who he was. His photo was the only thing of note I'd found when looking up the domain. The branch manager. I approached his table, and before I could ask if he was expecting me, he gestured to the chair across from him. He was an older man, maybe 50, with sad, droopy eyes. His nose was so thin and pointy it looked like a shark's fin. He seemed to have no nostrils at all. His jowls fluttered slightly as he spoke in a soft, low tone. "Thank you for coming, young man. It's good to finally see you," he said, extending an arm for a handshake. I tried my best to sound steady and firm, despite my rising anxiety. "Thank you, sir." The conversation that followed was surprisingly pleasant. The food was better than almost anything I had ever had, decadent and strangely nostalgic, as if it had been made just for me. He asked about my childhood, my current working conditions, and my family life. Most of these memories weren't pleasant, but it felt good to have someone simply listen. I reached a point where I started letting my guard down. He never interrupted, never judged, just watched. If you see a man drowning in Lake Wilcox, don't help him. I know. It sounds awful, but I have to warn you anyway. It's not worth the risk, even if the person drowning might not be him. You'll never see his face through the splashes, so don't think it's a simple matter of recognition. They say he only appears at night, but I've heard a story or two from the daylight hours over the years. It's never safe to rescue someone. The locals all know this, but I didn't. Not until it was far too late. It was summer of 2006. I was 19 back then, just a dumbass kid shouldering a dangerous feeling of invincibility. Enough so that I had become a volunteer firefighter straight out of high school. Most of my friends went off to college, so the semester months of late 2005 had been quite lonely. I saw my best friend Carson over winter break, and she must have picked up on my low mood. "I'll tell you what, Joey," she had said. "Next summer, I'll grab Trish and Cole, and we'll all go on a camping trip." At the time, the very idea caused my heart to grow wings and soar to cloud 9. I wish I could forget that feeling. Maybe the fall wouldn't hurt as much from a lesser height. Trish and Cole had been our friends since 6th grade. Carson and I took bets on how long it would take those two to get together, but we both lost. They were smart enough to stay just friends until they were accepted to the same college. While I had known Carson since kindergarten, they were still very dear friends of mine all the same. The 4 of us had gone camping with Cole's parents in the summer of 1999. The group unanimously considered the trip to be our finest hour. Hell, I still have a picture of us from that trip on my desk at home. You can clearly see Cole looking at Trish, and we gave him shit about it for years. Some days, I even turn it around to face me as I write. As the summer approached, our excitement grew. We'd already bought the tents, some fishing gear, and a cooler for our illicit beverages. We borrowed the rest from Cole's family. We planned most of the details out, And by we, I mean Trish, as she didn't appreciate spontaneity like the rest of us did. And I had the printed directions to Lake Wilcox in hand when Carson rolled up in her 1992 Tahoe. I quickly threw my gear and backpack in the rear before jumping into the passenger seat. The moment I sat down, Carson leaned over and gave me a hug. Hey, there he is, came Cole's voice from the back seat as he clapped a massive hand on my shoulder. It's so good to see you, beamed Trish as she held Cole's other hand. How've you been? Can't complain, I replied. I had my first house fire last week. Everyone made it out before we even got there. And yes, they had their cat with them. I've never seen a cat looking so pissed off. Jesus, Joey, said Cole, shaking his head. You sound way too excited when you talk about burning buildings. Carson glanced over, agreement clear in her eyes. Yeah, I know, I said as I rubbed the back of my neck. Just promise us you won't be stupid and rush in, Trish added. I want this trip to be an annual thing, and it won't be the same without your dumb ass. I smiled. I promise. So, Carson interrupted. You gonna tell me which way we're going, First Officer dipshit? The rest of the 4-hour drive went much the same way. It gave us plenty of time to catch up with one another, and Cole took full advantage of the cooler within arm's reach. Trish frowned disapprovingly as he stumbled while exiting Carson's Tahoe. The rest of us followed suit, and together we walked across the gravel lot towards the tree line. I'll give it to Trish. She picked one hell of a spot. The trees were tall, yet not so dense as to block too much sunlight or hinder hiking. A perfect combination of shade and the space to toss a frisbee. I could already see several perfect locations to set up our tents. And then there was Lake Wilcox itself. The waters reached the shore no more than 50 feet from where we would ultimately set up camp. An old dock stood nearby, going out about 20 feet into the lake. The surface was calm, but moved enough to soothe any worries of still water. Oh, hell yeah! Cole cheered. This is gonna be so awesome! Babe, you're incredible! Trish huffed, but couldn't quite hide her smile. Yeah, Trish, this looks perfect, Carson added. How did you find this place? Google Earth, Trish replied with pride. It looked like a great place to camp. The nearest town is only 2 miles away in case we end up needing anything, she said, glancing at the notoriously forgetful Cole. Plus, I couldn't find anything online about people camping here, so I figured we'd probably have the place to ourselves. Well, it looks like you were right, I chimed in. I don't see any campsites. Hell, it looks like nobody's been here in a while. Well, let's hurry up and get our tents up so we can start drinking, said Cole, effortlessly knocking the smile clear off Trish's face. Once we were set up, the fun really began. The drinks were flowing, the fish were biting, and Cole had the time of his life as we tossed a football back and forth. He blew out his knee during his senior season, and I could tell how much he enjoyed catching passes again. Her laughter was cut short when her feet touched the bottom again, about 100 yards from the shore. Hey, Joey, come check this out, she said as she stood up. Sure enough, my feet soon touched the bottom as well. At my full height, the water barely reached my waist. It must be a sandbar, she said. This is pretty cool. Yeah, you're right. Think we should call Trish and Cole out here? Carson looked back towards the shore. The couple were having a blast splashing each other back in the shallows, as if we weren't even here. Nah, she said, as she lowered her body back into the shallow water. It's like our own private island. She paused. Unless you've got a problem with being stranded on an island with me, why would I? Yes, readers, I couldn't read a flashing neon sign.
Anyway, we stayed right there for around half an hour, only swimming back as the sun began to slide below the horizon. Soon, the 4 of us were comfortably surrounding a small campfire. Hey, can I talk to you for a sec? Cole asked me, quietly. Yeah, of course, I said as I set my beer down. Cole beckoned me over and I joined him a short distance away. All right, what's up, man? Cole rubbed the back of his head sheepishly. My dumbass left the protection at home. I mean, I've got a gun in my bag, I replied. No, dude, the other protection. Oh, well, good job, buddy. If you're asking me for one, I don't have any. Damn, I was hoping you finally had the balls to make a move on Carson. Hurtful. Anyway, said Cole, do you think Carson would let me borrow her Tahoe so I can get some in town? Why are you asking me? Ask her. And are you even sober? Yeah, I'm good, he assured me. I noticed my fuck up when I put my stuff in our tent, so I haven't had a drink since we got here. Can you ask her? I don't want Trish to know. I rolled my eyes. Whatever, man. I'll see what I can do. Carson was hesitant, but Cole really had sobered up in the hours we had been here, so she agreed and gave him directions to the nearby town. Cole fed Trish a story of wanting to grab some more snacks, and he left. By this point, Carson and I were quite drunk and returned to our tents once Trish assured us that she would be all right waiting for Cole. I didn't wake up until I heard Carson scream,
Trish! Oh my god, Joe! Get out here now!
I never moved so fast in my life. I was out of my tent like a shot and immediately saw Carson kneeling at the water's edge. My heart sank as I sprinted towards her. But she wasn't alone. Though only lit by moonlight, I could still see that she was dragging Trish ashore. And Trish was unresponsive. My training kicked in, and I quickly rolled Trish onto her back to clear her airway. I couldn't feel a pulse, so I began CPR. Water flowed from her open mouth with the first compression. As soon as the water stopped, I began mouth to mouth, but Carson stopped me. I'll do that. You focus on her heart. I pushed down on her chest with everything I had. The sickening crunch of my friend's ribs breaking under my hands is a feeling that will never leave me, but it was no use. As soon as I had a proper look at her face, I knew Trish was gone. Her skin had gone pale with the telltale blue tint of asphyxiation. Her open, unfocused eyes were the final sign that my efforts were in vain. Slowly, I stopped my compressions and Carson buried her face in my shoulder and began to cry. I hadn't even noticed my own tears until that moment. I reached down and closed her eyes. Carson, what happened? I stepped out to pee, and I saw her floating in the water, she responded between soft sobs. She was face down. I looked down at the body of our friend. She was still wearing her gym shorts and tank top, as if she hadn't planned on entering the water. I steadied myself as best I could. We need to call the police, I said gently. Carson nodded and rubbed her eyes before standing up and walking back towards her tent to grab her phone. Something else was bothering me, though. Trish had been a member of our school's swimming team. For her to drown like this made no sense. But there was one other thing. To this day, Carson doesn't know what I saw in the water as we pulled Trish out. Eyes, glazed over as if dead. Until they blinked, but they immediately vanished after that. At the time, I assumed it had been a large catfish or something. I have no signal, came Carson's voice from behind me. Shit, I'll go try. Sure enough, my phone also had no service, same with Trish's. And Cole has the truck, I thought aloud as the full helplessness of the situation hit me. Cole, whispered Carson. Oh God, how are we gonna tell him? I'll tell him, I said. I've had to do it before. What Carson didn't know was the day after the house fire my department had put out, I'd responded to a car accident. I had to tell the driver that his brother in the passenger seat was gone. Help me. The voice came with a flurry of frantic splashing in the lake behind me. I whipped around to see a man foundering a few hundred feet from the shore. Instinct once again took over, and I tossed my phone aside. But before I could jump into the water, I felt a hand clamp down on my shoulder. Wait, came Carson's voice from behind me. Let go, I said, trying to shrug her hand off of me, but she gripped tighter. Joseph, something's not right. We had been friends for 15 years at that time, and not once had she called me that. Not just that, there was a fear in her voice I had never heard before. It was enough to stop me in my tracks. I looked back, and Carson was staring out at the drowning man. Look where he is. I turned back towards the lake and froze. The turbulent water was directly over the sandbar. The man was splashing in less than 3 feet of water. My body went cold. My instincts screamed as if I had come face to face with a mountain lion. We watched the lake in silence for what felt like an eternity as the man continued to call for help until he stopped. The lake instantly fell silent, along with any wildlife in the area. It was as if the woods themselves held their breath, and a pale face began emerging from the water where the man had been. It broke the surface and it just kept rising. It finally came to a stop around 6 feet above the water, and that was when I noticed the body of a man beneath it. He stood motionless on the surface. As he stared at us, another detail emerged. His neck was broken. The dead eyes staring back at us were nearly vertical. The man let out a horrific screech and sprinted across the water straight towards us. Far, far faster than any man ever could, with his head flopping against his shoulder the entire way. His movements weren't natural, almost like a section of film with too many cuts and sloppy editing. Before we could even react to what was happening, he came to an instant halt at the same point the water did, less than 4 feet from Carson. The man glanced at the ground before him and glared at us with utter malice, clear in his broken face. "What's going on? Who the fuck is that?" came Cole's voice from somewhere behind us. The man's head snapped upright instantly. A terrifying smile full of rotten, broken teeth crept across his features before taking a step backward into the water. Cole must have noticed Trish's body as he let out a cry and rushed to her side, hopelessly shaking his dead fiancée. "What did you do to her?" he roared, tears forming in his eyes as he turned to face the smiling man, who responded by taking another step back into the lake and holding his grin. "Cole, don't!" Carson screamed, but it was too late. Cole charged his partner's killer. "You son of a bitch, I'll kill yo!" was all he got out before being pulled underwater. I dove in after him without a second thought. He was our friend. He would have done the same for us. I swam after the bubble trail as fast as I could, but I only made it 50 feet before something tightened around my neck and snapped my head backward down into the pitch black water. I felt a thud below me, as if something heavy had impacted the lake floor. The shimmering moonlight was barely visible on the surface about 20 feet above me. My hands clawed at the invisible rope around my neck as my lungs began to burn. My vision started to blur. My movements slowed, though I refused to give up as a shadow blocked the dim light from above. Carson. She'd found me. I hadn't noticed her following me into the water after Cole. She grabbed my arm and pulled against the invisible rope as it fought to take my life. She must have noticed my struggle against my own throat, and she reached for the bob, force holding me under, and it vanished. I was free. Carson dragged me to the surface just before the inevitable reflex to breathe could draw water into my lungs. Seconds after we surfaced, a muffled screech emitted from the bubbling waters below. It sounded pissed. "Swim," she shouted. Leading up to this moment, I wasn't a particularly fast swimmer. However, survival instincts easily doubled my normal pace as we frantically swam for the bank. But we weren't the only ones. A stream of bubbles was streaking towards us from behind. I fucking felt the man swim past me just before Carson went under. Without a second thought, I pushed myself back underwater after her, but whatever this thing was put banshees to shame. A scream reverberated through the water with enough force to permanently damage my hearing. But I could see Carson surfacing again. We ran the moment our feet touched the bottom and scrambled ashore. I looked over my shoulder, and man, do I regret it. The man was once again standing on the surface of less than an inch of water behind us. His head was once again hanging by his shoulder, but he reached up, grabbed his hair, and used it to hold his head upright as he glared at us. The waters around him grew turbulent as his milky, dead eyes narrowed in pure hatred. Then he vanished. The water became still. The world was instantly as it should be. Well, almost. Cole never resurfaced. Everything after that was a blur. The local sheriff and his men recovered Trish's body from the shore where we left her. There were funerals, furious, grieving relatives, and blackout drinking on my part. But even through the haze, I noticed one thing. The deputies were very careful to avoid touching the water as they worked. They knew. That was 19 years ago. Despite my best efforts to ruin things by becoming an alcoholic, Carson married me anyway once I sobered up for good. We spent years researching the history of the area, and eventually, we found a name. Anyway, we stayed right there for around half an hour, only swimming back as the sun began to slide below the horizon. Soon, the four of us were comfortably surrounding a small campfire. "Hey, can I talk to you for a sec?" Cole asked me, quietly. "Yeah, of course," I said as I set my beer down. Cole beckoned me over, and I joined him a short distance away. "All right, what's up, man?" Cole rubbed the back of his head sheepishly. "My dumb ass left the protection at home." "I mean, I've got a gun in my bag," I replied. "No, dude, the other protection." "Oh, well, good job, buddy. If you're asking me for one, I don't have any." "Damn. I was hoping you finally had the balls to make a move on Carson." "Hurtful." "Anyway," said Cole, "do you think Carson would let me borrow her Tahoe so I can get some in town?" "Why are you asking me? Ask her. And are you even sober?" "Yeah, I'm good," he assured me. "I noticed my fuck up when I put my stuff in our tent, so I haven't had a drink since we got here. Can you ask her? I don't want Trish to know." I rolled my eyes. "Whatever, man, I'll see what I can do." And Carson was hesitant, but Cole really had sobered up in the hours we had been here, so she agreed and gave him directions to the nearby town. Cole fed Trish a story of wanting to grab some more snacks, and he left. By this point, Carson and I were quite drunk and returned to our tents once Trish assured us that she would be all right waiting for Cole. I didn't wake up until I heard Carson scream, "Trish! Oh my god, Joe, get out here now!" I never moved so fast in my life. I was out of my tent like a shot and immediately saw Carson kneeling at the water's edge. My heart sank as I sprinted towards her, but she wasn't alone. Though only lit by moonlight, I could still see that she was dragging Trish ashore, and Trish was unresponsive. My training kicked in, and I quickly rolled Trish onto her back to clear her airway. I couldn't feel a pulse, so I began CPR,